This is a daguerreotype of one of Edgar Allan Poe's lifelong friends, John Hamilton Mackenzie. You might not know who he is, so that's why I'm going to tell you all about him. He was Edgar Allan Poe's sister, Rosalie Mackenzie Poe's foster brother. So when the Poe kids got orphaned, his older brother Henry went to live with the Poe relatives in Baltimore, and Edgar and Rosalie stayed here in Richmond. And you know which family took in Edgar? The Allens. So his sister went to live with the Mackenzie family. They already had other kids in the house, and the oldest son was John Hamilton Mackenzie. John was kind of a troublemaker. He was climbing a tree, fell out, broke his arm. So his mother said, "You have to stay inside, stay out of trouble." And then he was bouncing on a bed and fell off, broke his arm. So then after that, his mother punished him by saying, "You have to take care of this 3-year-old." And John didn't know what to do, so he started entertaining him by telling him stories. And that was Poe's first education as a storyteller. Before you know it, the little 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, he started telling better stories than John was and started entertaining John with his stories. So Poe, from that point on, was a storyteller, whether it was in prose or in poetry. And that just really kicked off their friendship. Growing up, Poe didn't bring other kids to the Allen house. His foster father was cold and aloof, sometimes abusive. His foster mother was often sick and really couldn't do much to help Edgar. So Poe would go to friends' houses, and especially to the Mackenzie house. And the Mackenzies were pretty well off. John's father, William Mackenzie, ran a maritime insurance company and also owned a lot of real estate in downtown Richmond. John's aunt, who is also named Jane Mackenzie, but not the same Jane Mackenzie who was his mother, she ran the Mackenzie School for Girls. So this was a house that encouraged learning and literacy and art and music. And there were kids running around all over the place. There were several different Mackenzie family brothers and sisters. So that's where Edgar liked to stay and hang out. And he became good friends with a lot of the Mackenzie sons, but especially with John. Now, eventually, Edgar became a teenager, and he did stunts like swimming that 6 miles in the James River that set the record and made the news. He also, with some of his friends, put together a stage and held amateur theatrical productions. By this time, John's 3 years older, so he started a company that sold horses, mules, and carriages, and was pretty good at it. He was pretty well off. So over the years, when Poe was struggling to make a living, John would frequently give him loans. And he knew these wouldn't be paid back, but he said he never regretted for a second helping out his old pal Edgar. In fact, when Edgar got married, it was John who paid for Poe's wife's wedding dress. And John's wife sewed the dress for it. Over the years, Poe and his wife and mother-in-law moved up to Philadelphia and New York, but he kept in touch with John. And John helped him negotiate to purchase the subscriber list from the Southern Literary Messenger after the first owner died. It didn't work, but at least John helped him out with that. And John had another connection with Poe, with both Poes really. After William Mackenzie died, when John's about 23 years old, he became Rosalie Poe's legal guardian. And she'd been left a lot of money by a wealthy miller named Joseph Gallejo, and he sort of helped manage that money for her. And when Rosalie Poe wanted to go up to Philadelphia to visit Edgar, it was John who took her up there to see him. So they really stayed in touch for the rest of their lives. And in later years, after Poe's wife died, it was John who wrote him and said, "You know, your old girlfriend Elmira Royster Shelton's available, and she's been asking about you." So naturally, Edgar came back to Richmond, and when he couldn't afford a place to stay, guess where he turned up? The Mackenzie house. Those last 2 summers of his life, he spent a lot of time at the Mackenzie house, Duncan Lodge, on the western outskirts of town. It's not there anymore, but he would frequently entertain Mrs. Mackenzie and his sister with poetry readings, and then he'd go out and play games in the yard, field sports. Poe especially liked leaping. Yeah, he really bragged about his broad jump. He said he could jump farther than anybody else. And even when he's 40 years old, he's still out leaping these younger kids. And John had fond memories of that last visit to Richmond. He said his 7-year-old daughter would sit on Poe's lap and she'd run his fingers through his curly hair. And Poe got in trouble with one of the Mackenzie ladies for throwing her baby up in the air multiple times and catching it. And probably the baby loved it, but it was kind of dangerous. And after Poe left for that last visit, he left his boot hooks, which are also in the Poe Museum's collection. And John Mackenzie held on to them as a souvenir of his famous friend. And then after Poe's death, Rosalie Poe continued to live with the Mackenzie family, and John was later called upon by Poe biographers, especially Susan Archer Talley-Weiss, who wrote The Home Life of Poe, but also wrote a lot of articles about Poe and his last visit to Richmond. And John was a major source of information. And our collection here has a lot of letters written in the Mackenzie family telling the other side of Poe that the public doesn't really see. So we're working right now to digitize those letters, but I just wanted to show you this little daguerreotype, because it's always nice to put a face to these names, to these historical figures. And these are the people that knew Poe best. And they showed you a side of Poe that you really don't get elsewhere. The guy who loved a good leaping contest, or who kids thought was hilarious, or the loyal and trusted friend. So that's just a little bit of information about our John Hamilton Mackenzie daguerreotype. You can find more about it at our website, poemuseum.org. And until next time, thanks for all your support, Poe patrons. And I'll leave you with more gratuitous footage of the Poe Museum cats doing Poe Museum cat stuff.